The hospital wing smelled like disinfectant and old coffee. Major Kestrel Ghost, Novik opened her eyes to white ceiling tiles and the mechanical beep of monitors. Her chest felt like someone had parked a Humvee on it. The IV in her arm tugged when she tried to move. Outside her window, the sky was that particular shade of blue that only exists at 20,000 feet, the kind she'd spent 15 years chasing. A nurse walked past, then stopped, backed up and stared. Within minutes, three more appeared. Then a doctor. Then someone in dress blues she didn't recognize. They all looked at her the same way, like she was already a ghost, like seeing her awake violated some natural law. Nobody would tell her what happened. Nobody would explain why her hands were bandaged or why her right shoulder was immobilized or why every breath felt like swallowing broken glass. They just kept saying she needed to rest, that everything would be explained soon, that she was lucky to be alive. Lucky, the word tasted wrong. She'd been flying an armed reconnaissance mission over the Coast Province. She remembered that much. An AC-130U spooky gunship, 12 souls on board, call sign Reaper 6. The mission was routine, overwatch for a marine ground element pushing through a valley the Taliban had been using as a supply corridor. She'd flown that route 17 times. She remembered the weather turning, remembered the radio chatter getting tense. Then nothing. Just a blank space where her memory should be, like someone had taken an eraser to the cockpit recordings of her mind. The nurse finally spoke. Her voice was careful, like she was diffusing a bomb with words. "There are people waiting to see you, a lot of people." Kestrel's throat was sandpaper. "How many is a lot?" The nurse glanced at the doctor. He nodded. 843 last count. They've been out there for 2 days. They won't leave. Outside, beyond the window, she could see them now. Rows and rows of Marines in formation, standing in the Afghan sun like stone monuments. They weren't moving, weren't talking. Just standing there, dress uniforms crisp despite the heat, facing her window. Some had been crying, she could tell even from this distance. A colonel she'd never met entered the room. His face was carved from old leather and hard decisions. He looked at her like she'd personally rewritten every manual he'd ever memorized. "Major Novik," he said quietly. "Do you remember Captain Elias Vance?" The name hit her like turbulence. Vance. Young, eager, fresh out of flight school. She'd been his instructor once back at Hurlburt Field. He'd washed out of her program, couldn't handle the pressure, the split-second decisions, the weight of lives depending on your hands staying steady when everything was falling apart. She'd signed the paperwork herself, watched him walk away defeated. That was 4 years ago. "I remember," she said. The colonel pulled a chair close. His hands were shaking slightly. "He was commanding the Marine element you were providing overwatch for. 281 men, surrounded, taking fire from 3 sides. They'd walked into a kill zone. Communication was breaking down. Vance called for immediate close air support. Kestrel's heart monitor started beeping faster. Fragments were coming back now, sharp and cutting. The radio. Vance's voice, older now, steadier than she remembered, but cracking at the edges. "Ghost, we're pinned down. I've got wounded. I need guns now." She'd seen the map, seen where the enemy fire was coming from, seen where the Marines were clustered, desperate, fighting for every second. "The weather," she whispered. The colonel nodded. "Zero visibility, ground fog, dust storm rolling in, wind shear that would have torn a normal aircraft apart. Command told you to abort. Told you the risk was too high, that you'd never make the gun run in those conditions, that you'd be flying blind into a mountain range with a 70-ton aircraft." Her hands clenched despite the bandages. She remembered now, remembered the choice. "Command denied the request for close air support," the colonel continued. "They ordered you to return to base. Standard protocol. They were right by every measure. No pilot could have made that run. But she had anyway. She'd cut the radio link to command, switched to the ground frequency, and talked directly to Vance. Her voice had been calm, almost gentle. "Reaper 6 is inbound. Mark your position with infrared strobes. Keep your men's heads down. This is going to be close." The gunship had bucked and screamed through the weather. The AC-130U was never meant to fly like that, low, fast, in conditions that would ground any sane pilot. But Kestrel wasn't sane. She was Ghost, and she'd earned that call sign by doing the impossible so many times it started looking routine. Her co-pilot, Lieutenant Reeves, hadn't said a word. just gripped his controls and trusted her. The sensor operators in back were calling out terrain warnings every 3 seconds. Mountains appearing out of nowhere, wind shear throwing them sideways. The targeting systems were useless in the soup. She'd flown by instinct and math, calculating angles in her head that computers couldn't process fast enough. "Talk to me, Vance," she'd said into the radio. "I need your eyes." And he had. Vance had talked her in like he was born to do it, his voice cutting through the chaos with coordinates and corrections. He'd learned something in those 4 years, learned how to lead. How to stay calm when the world was ending. Maybe he'd learned it from her back when she'd failed him. Maybe that failure had taught him more than any success could have. The first gun run had scattered the enemy position on the North Ridge. The 105 howitzer had spoken, and the earth had answered with fire. She'd pulled up, fought the wind, brought the gunship around for another pass. 3 more times she'd done it, threading the needle between mountains she couldn't see, trusting Vance's voice and her own hands to keep them alive. The Marines had broken through. All 281 of them made it out. Then the hydraulics had failed. The colonel's voice brought her back. "You kept that aircraft in the air for another 40 minutes on backup systems alone. You flew it over 2 mountain ranges to get it away from populated areas. Your co-pilot said you were singing old country music." Patsy Cline. She didn't remember that part. "You set it down in a dry riverbed, perfect landing," they said, "the kind they teach in textbooks. Then you collapsed. Massive internal bleeding from the G-forces. 3 fractured ribs, collapsed lung. Your body had been shutting down for the last 20 minutes of flight and you just kept flying." The nurse was crying now, trying to hide it. Kestrel looked at her bandaged hands. "My crew. Alive, every one of them. Reeves won't stop talking about you. Says he's never flying with another pilot as long as he lives because nobody else will measure up." The colonel stood. "Captain Vance is outside. He's been there since they brought you in. He won't leave. None of them will. You saved 281 Marines, Major. You saved my son." His voice broke on the last word. "Vance is your son. He never told me his instructor was the pilot who saved his life. I had to hear it from the radio recordings. He said he didn't wash out. Said you taught him exactly what he needed to know. Taught him that passing your course wasn't about flying. It was about knowing when to trust someone else to fly for you." Through the window, she could see Vance now, standing at attention in the front row. Even from here, she could see the tears on his face. The colonel placed something on her bedside table. A small wooden box. "This is from the men. They took a vote, unanimous." Inside was a pair of wings, not Air Force wings, Marine Corps wings. Aviator wings they had no authority to give her, no regulation that allowed it, but they'd given them anyway. "They're saying you're one of them now," the colonel said. "Whether the paperwork agrees or not." Kestrel couldn't speak. The words were stuck somewhere behind the broken ribs and collapsed lung. The colonel moved toward the door, then paused. "Ghost was always a good call sign, but the men have a new name for you now. They're calling you Shepherd because you brought them all home." When he left, the silence was enormous. Kestrel held the wings in her bandaged hands and looked out at the 843 Marines standing in formation, standing for her. They'd been there for 2 days. They'd sleep there, eat there, wait there until she walked out under her own power. That's what Marines did. The next day, a major general arrived. Kestrel was sitting up now, breathing easier, the tubes removed. The general was old school, with a face like a clenched fist and a chest full of ribbons that told stories from 3 different wars. He didn't smile, didn't soften. "Major Novick, I'm General Marcus Thorne. I commanded the Marine Expeditionary Unit that Captain Vance's element belonged to." She tried to salute. Her shoulders screamed in protest. "At ease, Major. You've done enough." He pulled up a chair, sat with the weight of a man who carried every casualty personally. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully. What you did was against every regulation. You violated direct orders. You risked a $70 million aircraft and 12 lives to save men who, according to the book, were already lost." His eyes were hard. "And I would have done the exact same thing." Kestrel blinked. "Sir, the military runs on rules because rules save lives. But rules are written by people who have never been pinned down in a kill zone, watching their men die. You broke the rules because you understood something more important, The mission isn't about following orders, it's about bringing people home. He leaned forward. Every pilot in the Air Force is going to study what you did. Most will say it was reckless. Some will say it was insane. They'll all be right, but none of them will understand what those Marines outside understand. What's that, sir? That sometimes the only difference between a hero and a memory is whether someone decides your life is worth breaking the rules for. You decided they were. Now they've decided you are. The general stood, placed a folder on her bed. These are official commendation letters from every man you saved. 281 letters, some barely literate, some poetry. One man wrote 15 pages. They all say the same thing, thank you. Kestrel's eyes burned. I was just doing my job, sir. No, Major, your job was to return to base. You did something else. You made a choice that cost you your career. The words landed like artillery. What? Command is pushing for a court-martial, disobeying direct orders, reckless endangerment. They have to politically. The optics of a pilot going rogue, even to save lives, it sets a precedent they can't allow. Her chest tightened. 15 years. 15 years of perfect service, of every metric exceeded, every mission completed. And it would end like this. However, the general continued, there's a problem. To court-martial you, they need witnesses willing to testify that what you did was wrong. They need your crew to say you endangered them. They need the Marines you saved to say the risk wasn't worth it. They need anyone to stand up and condemn your actions. He smiled for the first time. It was fierce and proud. They can't find a single person. Not one. Reeves told the investigating officer to go to hell. Your sensor operators said they'd resign rather than testify against you. And the Marines, he gestured to the window. The Marines have informed command that if you're court-martialed, they'll riot, not metaphorically, literally. 843 trained warfighters have signed a statement saying they'll refuse orders and face court-martial themselves if you're charged. Kestrel couldn't breathe. They can't do that. They already have. Command is in full panic mode. The story leaked. CNN, Fox News, every network picked it up. You're famous, Major. Female pilot defies orders to save Marines. The public loves it. Politicians are falling over themselves to praise you. The Secretary of Defense is personally reviewing the case. The general's expression softened. You're going to walk out of this, Novick. Not because the system worked, but because you've got an army of people who refuse to let it break you. Days passed. Kestrel grew stronger. Physical therapy helped her walk again, helped her breathe without feeling like she was drowning. The Marines remained outside. They set up a proper camp now, rotating shifts so there were always at least 200 on watch. Vance visited daily. The first time he couldn't speak. Just stood in the doorway, this captain who'd washed out of her program, looking at her like she'd descended from heaven on wings of fire. Finally, he'd said, "You failed me once. Best thing that ever happened." She'd smiled despite the pain. "You proved me wrong. That doesn't happen often. I learned from the best. You taught me that flying isn't about the aircraft. It's about the mission, about the people." He sat down and for an hour they talked. Not about the rescue, about everything else. About his family, his fears, his dreams. About how he'd spent 4 years proving to himself that he belonged in the sky, even if it wasn't behind the controls. He'd become a ground commander because she'd shown him that leadership wasn't about where you stood, it was about what you stood for. "My father never told me who his son was," Kestrel said. "I didn't want preferential treatment, wanted to earn it." Vance looked at his hands. "He respects you more than anyone, says you're the kind of officer he wished he'd been. I'm the kind who disobeys orders. You're the kind who knows which orders deserve to be disobeyed." It was the clearest endorsement of command she'd ever received. The investigation dragged on. Officers came and went, asking questions, reviewing flight data, analyzing the weather patterns and aircraft performance logs. The black box from the AC-130 told a story of impossible flying, of a pilot operating at the absolute edge of human capability. Some investigators looked at her with admiration, others with fear. Because if one pilot could do this, what did it say about all the times they'd followed orders and left people behind? A psychologist visited, Dr. Amara Chen, civilian contractor specializing in combat stress. She sat with a notepad but never wrote anything down. "How are you sleeping, Major?" "I'm not. Nightmares. No, I close my eyes and see the Marines standing outside. I can't figure out why. Chen nodded like this made perfect sense. You're not used to people watching you, are you? You've spent your career being invisible. Ghost. You operated in the dark, did the impossible, and disappeared before anyone could thank you. It was uncomfortably accurate. Now you're visible. Hundreds of people see you, need to see you, and it's terrifying because visibility means vulnerability, means you can fail where they can watch. Kestrel looked away. What if I can't do it again? What if that was my one miracle? Then you've already done more than most people do in 10 lifetimes. But Major, Chen leaned forward. That wasn't a miracle. That was skill, experience, and a choice. Miracles are accidents. What you did was deliberate. It felt like I didn't have a choice. That's what heroes always say, but you did. You chose to break the rules, chose to trust yourself over the system, chose to value lives over your career. Those were choices. Chen closed her notepad. The Marines outside aren't waiting for another miracle. They're waiting to see you walk again. To prove to themselves that the person who saved them is real, is still here, is still fighting. They don't need you to fly, they need you to exist. It was the most honest thing anyone had said. That night Kestrel dreamed of flying, not the rescue mission, something older. Her first solo flight, 18 years old, in a Cessna that rattled like a box of spare parts. She remembered the instructor's voice over the radio. You're alone now, trust yourself. She'd been trusting herself ever since. The Secretary of Defense arrived on a Tuesday. No fanfare, no press. Just a small convoy that pulled up to the hospital and a woman in a sharp suit who walked through the corridors like she owned them. Secretary Patricia Nkomo had flown F-16s in Desert Storm. She understood. She sat on the edge of Kestrel's bed uninvited. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen, Major. Then you're going to tell me if you can live with it. Kestrel sat up straighter. I'm listening, ma'am. The court-martial is being dropped. Officially, we're citing exceptional circumstances and the successful outcome of your actions. Unofficially, we're terrified of what happens if we prosecute you. The optics are a nightmare, and the Marines have made it clear they'll turn this into a war. Relief and disappointment mixed in equal measure. She'd been ready to fight. However, Nkomo continued, you can never fly combat missions again. The insurance alone would bankrupt us, and every pilot would use you as precedent to ignore orders. We can't have that, so you're being reassigned. Kestrel's heart sank. To what? Training command. You're going to teach the next generation of pilots, show them how to fly like you do. More importantly, show them how to make the choices you made. I'm a combat pilot, ma'am, not a teacher. Nkomo's smile was sharp. You taught Vance, didn't you? Taught him so well he saved 281 men by knowing when to call for help. Sounds like you're exactly a teacher. The logic was infuriating because it was correct. You're also being promoted. Lieutenant Colonel, the medals will come later. Congressional Medal of Honor is being discussed, but that's above my pay grade. Kestrel shook her head. I don't want medals for doing my job. Good, because the men outside don't need medals to know what you did. They need you to keep existing. Keep flying, even if it's in a classroom. Keep showing people that the rules exist to save lives, but saving lives sometimes means knowing which rules to break. Nkomo stood. You scared the hell out of a lot of people, Novik, made them question everything, but you also reminded them why we do this, not for the flag or the medals or the glory, for each other, for the person next to you who needs you to be better than you think you can be. She saluted. A 4-star secretary saluting a broken major in a hospital bed. Welcome to the rest of your life, Colonel. Try not to start any more revolutions. When she left, Kestrel was alone with the weight of it. Promotion, reassignment, medals she didn't want for a mission she couldn't remember choosing. Outside, the Marines remained, 3 weeks now. The media had tried to interview them. They'd refused, just stood there silent, a wall of flesh and conviction. Someone had started leaving gifts. Not for the Marines, for her. Letters, drawings from their kids, photographs of families that existed because she'd broken the rules. A teddy bear wearing aviator wings. A hand-carved wooden angel with a propeller for a halo. She kept them all. Physical therapy intensified. The doctors said she'd never fly combat again, not because of regulations, but because her body couldn't handle it. The G-forces had done permanent damage. Her ribs would always ache. Her lung would always be weak. She traded pieces of herself for those Marines and they'd never grow back. Worth it. Every time. By week 4 she could walk. Slowly, painfully, but under her own power. The nurses applauded. The doctors smiled. The Marines outside stood straighter. On day 30, General Thorne returned. "It's time, Colonel." She'd practiced this. Gotten dressed in a fresh uniform they'd brought, the new rank insignia feeling heavy and foreign. Pinned on the Marine Corps wings the men had given her, unofficial and probably against a dozen regulations. Looked at herself in the mirror and saw someone she almost didn't recognize. The walk to the hospital entrance felt like miles. Every step hurt. Every breath was a negotiation with damaged tissue and stubborn pride. The doors opened. Sunlight hit her like a physical force, and 843 Marines came to attention as one. The sound was like thunder. Hundreds of boots hitting the ground simultaneously, hundreds of hands snapping to salute, a wall of precision and respect that stretched across the entire courtyard. Kestrel froze. She'd seen formations before, had flown over thousands of troops, but this was different. This was personal. Vance stood at the front, tears streaming down his face, salute rigid and perfect. His father stood next to him, equally emotional, equally proud. Behind them, rows and rows of men and women she'd saved, some she'd never seen, some she'd never even know existed until that night. They'd waited a month, waited through rain and heat and bureaucratic nightmares, waited because leaving felt like abandoning her the way no one had abandoned them. General Thorne whispered, "You need to walk through them. They won't lower their salute until you do." Her legs felt weak, not from the injuries, from the sheer weight of being seen, of mattering this much to this many people. She took a step, then another. The Marines didn't move, didn't blink, just held their salutes as she walked through their formation, every eye tracking her, every face telling a story of the moment they thought they'd die and didn't. Halfway through, a voice called out, young, breaking, "Thank you, ma'am." Then another, "Thank you, Ghost," and another. Until it was a chorus, 800 voices saying the same 2 words over and over, a wave of gratitude that crashed over her and pulled her under. She couldn't stop the tears, didn't try, just kept walking, kept breathing, kept existing because that's what they needed. Proof that the person who saved them was real, was whole, was still here. At the end of the formation, a small stage had been erected. The Secretary of Defense stood there. Cameras had arrived. This part was for the world. Nkomo's voice carried across the courtyard. "Lieutenant Colonel Kestrel Novick, in recognition of extraordinary heroism and disregard for personal safety, you are hereby awarded the Air Force Cross." The medal was heavy, silver suspended from a blue ribbon, second only to the Medal of Honor. It meant she'd done something that should have killed her and chose to do it anyway. The citation was read aloud. Every detail of the mission, the weather, the odds, the choice. The words made it sound noble. Made it sound like she'd calculated the risk and accepted it. The truth was simpler. She'd heard Marines dying and couldn't listen to it. "You broke the rules," Nkomo said quietly off mic. "But you saved the lives that mattered more than the rules. That's not something we can teach. It's something we can only hope to find." The ceremony ended. The formation dissolved. And then they came. One by one, 281 Marines, each waiting their turn to shake her hand, to say thank you, to show her pictures of their kids or their wedding or their dog, all the things that existed because she'd been crazy enough to fly into hell for them. Vance was last. He stood before her, this captain who'd washed out, and saluted. "Ma'am, permission to speak freely." "Granted. You told me once that I didn't have what it takes to fly combat. You were right. But you never said I didn't have what it takes to lead. You showed me that. And when I was surrounded, when I thought we were all going to die, I remembered something you said during training." She didn't remember saying anything profound, just the usual instructor talk. "What was that?" "You said flying isn't about the aircraft. It's about bringing everyone home. So when the weather was impossible and command said no pilot could make it, I knew you would, because you always bring everyone home." His voice cracked. "You brought me home, all of us, and we're never going to forget it." The following weeks were a blur of media appearances Kestrel didn't want and ceremonies she couldn't avoid. The story had gone viral exactly as the title promised. News segments, documentaries, congressional hearings about military procedures. She hated all of it. Being Ghost had meant operating in shadows. Being Shepherd meant standing in spotlights. The transition to training command came with a new assignment: Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada. Home of the weapons school where the best pilots became better. She'd be teaching tactics, decision-making, the art of flying when everything goes wrong. Her first class was 90 pilots, all men, all looking at her with expressions ranging from skepticism to barely concealed hostility. She knew what they were thinking. She'd been promoted for breaking the rules, given medals for insubordination, made a hero for doing what they'd been trained never to do. On the first day, she walked into the classroom and wrote 2 words on the board: "Trust yourself," then turned to face them. "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Novick. You know me as Ghost or Shepherd, depending on which story you believe. I'm here to teach you how to fly when the book says you can't, when command says abort, when every instinct screams that you're going to die." Silence, heavy and resentful. "But before I teach you how to break the rules, I'm going to teach you why the rules exist. Because every regulation is written in blood. Someone died so you know not to make their mistake. Respect that." She pulled up footage from her mission. The weather radar showing impossible conditions. The flight data showing maneuvers that should have torn the aircraft apart. The radio communication with Vance, his voice steady even as his world collapsed. This is what breaking the rules looks like. It looks like a 70-ton gunship flying through zero visibility. It looks like ignoring direct orders. It looks like almost dying for people you've never met. She paused the video on an image of the terrain they'd flown through, mountains invisible in fog. It also looks like 281 Marines going home to their families. One pilot raised his hand. Captain Marcus Webb, career officer, son of a general, everything by the book. "Ma'am, with respect, you violated direct orders. How do we know when it's okay to do that?" Kestrel smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "You don't, that's the point. If there was a manual for when to disobey orders, it would just be a new order. You have to decide every time, and you have to live with the consequences. What if we're wrong? Then people die and it's your fault. That's the job." The honesty was brutal. Some pilots shifted uncomfortably. "But here's what I can teach you. I can teach you how to calculate odds so fast you don't have time to doubt, how to fly by instinct when instruments fail, how to listen to the radio chatter and hear what people aren't saying, how to know, really know, when the risk is worth taking." She advanced the video, showed the gun runs, the precision required, the tiny margin between success and catastrophe. This wasn't luck. This was 15 years of training, of making mistakes in simulators so I wouldn't make them in combat. This was understanding my aircraft better than the engineers who built it. This was trust. "Trust in what?" Webb asked. "In myself, in my crew, in the Marines on the ground, in the belief that some things matter more than regulations." She shut off the video. "You're here because you're the best pilots in the Air Force. I'm here to make you better. Not by teaching you to break rules, but by teaching you to understand why they exist and what happens when they fail, because they will fail. And when they do, you need to be ready to make the choice that matters." The class ran for 6 hours. By the end, half the pilots looked at her differently, not with resentment, with something closer to awe. After class, Webb approached. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology. I thought you were here because you got lucky. I was wrong." "You weren't wrong to question, Captain. That's how you survive. Question everything, including me, especially me." He nodded slowly. "My cousin was there on the ground with Vance. He wrote me after the rescue, said he'd given up, said he was writing goodbye letters in his head. Then he heard your voice on Vance's radio, calm as anything, saying you were inbound." Webb's eyes were wet. "He said it was like hearing an angel, didn't think angels flew gunships." "Angels don't. Pilots do. Scared, uncertain pilots who choose to show up anyway." That became her teaching philosophy, showing them that heroism wasn't fearlessness. It was fear plus choice. The choice to act despite the terror, despite the odds, despite the voice in your head screaming to abort. Months passed. Her class graduated with the highest marks in weapons school history. They went on to combat assignments, to missions that tested everything she'd taught them. And when they faced impossible choices, they remembered her words: "Trust yourself, but earn that trust every single day." One of her students, Captain Jennifer Oakes, flew a rescue mission into hostile territory 6 months later, retrieved a downed pilot surrounded by enemy forces. ignored orders to wait for reinforcements, brought everyone home. In the debrief, when asked why she'd violated protocol, she'd said simply, "Colonel Novik taught me that some orders exist to cover the people giving them, not the people dying on the ground. I decided which mattered more." Oakes received a silver star. Kestrel received a call from command, furious that she was teaching pilots to disobey. She'd smiled and hung up. The following year, Kestrel was promoted to full colonel. The promotion came with command of the entire training wing. 40 instructors, hundreds of students, the responsibility of shaping the future of Air Force combat aviation. She accepted with the same reluctance she'd accepted everything else. Command meant meetings, paperwork, politics. It meant less time flying, less time teaching, more time defending her methods to officers who'd never made the choices she had. But it also meant protecting her instructors, meant ensuring that the next generation learned not just how to fly, but how to think, how to question, how to lead. Her office was sparse. No medals on the wall, no photographs of famous missions, just a single item on her desk, the Marine Corps Wings Vance's unit had given her. Some days she'd hold them and remember what it felt like to be broken in a hospital bed, to see 800 people standing in the sun for her. Those days kept her grounded. On her third year of command, Vance visited. He was a major now, still leading Marines, still carrying the lessons she'd inadvertently taught him. They sat in her office and drank terrible coffee. "I'm deploying again," he said. "Syria this time, different war, same questions." Kestrel nodded. "You scared, terrified. But I learned from someone that being scared means you understand the stakes, means you care enough to worry. Just remember to call for help when you need it. Don't be a hero," he laughed. "That's rich coming from you." "I'm serious. What I did, that was necessity, not heroism. The difference is important. Heroes charge in because they want to. Necessity means you charge in because no one else can." Vance set down his coffee. "I tell my Marines about you, not the mission, the choice. Tell them that being a good leader means knowing when to trust someone else to save you. That asking for help isn't weakness." "What do they say?" "They say they want to meet you, want to shake the hand of the woman who proved that the cavalry still exists if you're brave enough to call them." Kestrel felt the familiar weight of visibility. Even now, years later, people wanted something from her, proof that miracles happened, evidence that someone would break the rules for them. "Tell them I'm just a pilot, nothing special." "I will, and they won't believe me, because you're not just a pilot. You're the reason 281 Marines got to be fathers, husbands, sons. You're the reason I'm sitting here." That night, Kestrel drove out to the desert, away from the base, away from the lights, to where the sky opened up like an ocean. She'd started doing this when the weight got too heavy. Just her, the stars, and the silence. Out here she could breathe, could remember what it felt like to fly without the burden of expectation. Her phone buzzed. A message from Reeves, her former co-pilot. He was instructing now too, at a different base. The message was simple. "Student asked me today what it was like to fly with a legend. Told him legends are people who survive their own stupidity long enough to be remembered." He didn't get it. "You would," she smiled. Reeves understood. They'd both been in that cockpit, both made the choice to trust her judgment over command. He'd never questioned her, never doubted, just flew. That was its own kind of heroism. The stars were bright tonight. She found Cassiopeia, the constellation her father had shown her as a kid. "That's you," he'd said. "A warrior queen who got placed in the sky for being too brave for the earth to hold." She'd thought he was being poetic. Now she wondered if he'd been prophetic. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. Then another. Former students checking in, telling her about missions flown, lives saved, choices made. They wrote to her like she was a talisman, proof that breaking the rules could lead to something other than disaster. She wanted to tell them she'd just gotten lucky, that the mission could have ended with everyone dead, that she'd been terrified every second, that she still woke up sometimes feeling the gunship shake apart around her. But they needed the legend more than the truth. So she wrote back with encouragement, with tactical advice, with reminders to trust their training. Gave them pieces of herself because that's what teachers did. Dawn came. She drove back to base. Another day of meetings, of bureaucracy, of fighting to protect the program that taught pilots to think instead of just obey. The years accumulated. Kestrel's legend grew despite her efforts to contain it. Books were written, movies optioned. Congressional hearings referenced her mission as a case study in military ethics. She hated all of it, but she used it. Every time command tried to shut down her training methods, she'd remind them of the success rate. Pilots trained at her school had lower casualty rates, higher mission success rates, better leadership metrics. The numbers didn't lie, even if the legend did. She was 53 when the heart attack hit. Not dramatic, not in combat, just a quiet moment in her office reviewing training schedules when her chest seized and the world tilted. The medics saved her, barely, 3 bypasses. The surgeon said she damaged her heart years ago, probably from the G-forces during the rescue mission. The damage had accumulated silently, waiting. Retirement was mandatory, medical discharge. Honorable with full benefits, but still, the end of a career that had defined her. She'd fought every battle but time. The ceremony was enormous. They wanted to make it a spectacle. She refused, just a small gathering on the flight line at Nellie's, her students past and present, her instructors, a few generals who understood, and Vance. He was a colonel now, 3 combat deployments behind him, a rising star in the Marines. He'd brought his family, wife, 3 kids. "They exist because of you," he said simply. Kestrel looked at the children. The oldest, a daughter, maybe 12, looked at her with wide eyes. "Are you the lady who saved my dad?" "I'm the lady who helped your dad save himself," Kestrel corrected. "He did the hard part." The girl considered this. "Dad says you're a hero. Your dad is generous." Vance knelt next to his daughter. "Colonel Novick taught me that being a hero means showing up when everyone else has given up. Means making the choice that scares you because it's the right one. Can you be that kind of person?" The girl nodded solemnly. Watching them, Kestrel understood why she'd done it, not for medals or recognition, for this, for futures that existed because she'd been too stubborn to follow orders that felt wrong. The retirement speech was short. She'd never been good at speeches. "I've spent 37 years in the Air Force, flown more missions than I can count, taught hundreds of pilots, and I learned something important." She paused, looking at the faces watching her. Young and old, students and peers, people whose lives had intersected with hers in ways large and small. "The rules exist to protect us, but they're written by people who have never been where you are, facing what you face. So follow them, respect them, until the moment comes when following them means abandoning someone who needs you. Then make the choice, trust yourself, and live with the consequences." It wasn't inspiring, wasn't poetic, but it was true. The applause was respectful, not thunderous. Preferred it that way. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed, General Thorne approached. He was retired too, but he'd come anyway. "My son told me to give you something." He handed her a letter, thick handwritten, sealed with wax like something from another century. "What is it?" "Letters from every Marine you saved. They've been writing them for years. Updated addresses, new kids, life events. Vance collected them, said you should know what you made possible." The weight of the envelope was enormous. "I didn't make anything possible. They did that themselves. They lived because you chose to give them the chance." "That's not nothing, Colonel," Thorne saluted. She returned it. 2 old warriors acknowledging that their wars were over, even if the world kept fighting. That night, alone in her small house off base, Kestrel opened the envelope. 281 letters. Some typed, some handwritten, some from the Marines themselves, some from family members writing on behalf of men who'd struggled to find words. Each letter was a life, a wedding, a birth, a graduation, a promotion, a moment of joy that existed in defiance of the day they should have died. She read them all, cover to cover. It took hours. Some made her laugh, some made her cry. All of them made her feel the weight of what a single choice could mean. One letter stood out, from a corporal named Davis. He wrote, "Ma'am, I was 22 when you saved us. I'm 31 now, married, 2 kids. I teach history at a high school in Ohio. Sometimes my students ask if I've ever done anything heroic. I tell them no, but I tell them about you, about the pilot who broke the rules because rules matter less than people. Some of them don't understand, but a few do. And maybe those few will grow up to be the kind of person who makes the choice when it matters. I hope so. Because the world needs more people like you. People who care more about doing what's right than doing what's safe." Thank you for giving me the chance to raise children who might become those people. That's the real heroism, giving the future a chance to exist." Kestrel set the letter down. Her hands were shaking. She'd never thought of it that way. Had never considered that saving those Marines meant saving the children they'd raise, the students they'd teach, the ripples spreading outward through time. Her choice hadn't just saved 281 lives. It had saved generations. The thought was overwhelming, humbling, terrifying, because it meant every choice mattered that much. Every moment where you decided to help or turn away, to risk or retreat, to care or stay safe, all of it mattered in ways you'd never see. She went to bed thinking about Davis, teaching history in Ohio, showing his students that heroism wasn't about being fearless. It was about being afraid and choosing to act anyway. Retirement was strange. No missions to fly, no students to teach, just silence and space and time to think about everything she'd done. She moved to Montana, a small cabin near the mountains, away from bases and cities and anyone who knew her name. Tried to disappear the way Ghost had always been meant to, but people found her anyway. Former students visited. Marines tracked her down. Reporters called, wanting anniversary stories, wanting to document the legend. She turned them all away except the students. They deserved her time. One student, now a major, came with a problem. He'd been in a situation similar to her famous mission. Combat troops surrounded, weather impossible, orders to abort. He'd followed orders. 3 Marines died. "I can't sleep," he told her. "Can't stop thinking that if I'd been braver, if I'd trusted myself like you taught me, they'd be alive." Kestrel looked at him carefully, saw the guilt eating him from the inside. "Tell me about the weather." He described conditions that were objectively worse than what she'd flown through. Wind shear that would have shredded an aircraft. Visibility that was literally zero. Terrain that was unmapped. "You made the right choice," she said. "What but you? I got lucky. The weather looked impossible, but there were gaps. Moments where visibility improved just enough. Vance's coordinates were perfect. My crew was the best. 1,000 things could have gone wrong and didn't. That's not skill. That's luck." She leaned forward. "If you'd flown that mission in the conditions you described, you'd be dead. Your crew would be dead. And those 3 Marines would still be dead, plus however many more would have died trying to rescue you." The major's eyes were wet. "So what do I do with this?" "You carry it. You remember their names. You use that weight to make better decisions next time. But you don't destroy yourself over a choice that was right, even if the outcome was wrong." He left looking marginally less broken. Kestrel watched him go and wondered if she'd said the right thing. Wondered if teaching people to trust themselves meant also teaching them to live with the times when trust wasn't enough. The years in Montana were peaceful. She hiked, read, kept a small garden that refused to grow properly, learned to exist without the constant pressure of being needed. But the world kept intruding. On the 20th anniversary of the rescue, the Marines held a ceremony. They asked her to attend. She refused, sent a letter instead. It was read aloud at the event and someone filmed it and the video went viral. Her words, read by Vance, now a general himself, to a crowd of thousands. "I'm often asked if I'd do it again, if I'd make the same choice knowing what it cost. The answer is yes. Not because I'm brave, but because I'm selfish. I couldn't live with the sound of men dying when I had the power to help. That's not heroism. That's self-preservation. I saved you to save myself from becoming the person who listened to you die. So thank me if you want. But understand that you saved me too. Saved me from a life of wondering if I could have made a difference and chose not to. We saved each other. That's what people do when they're brave enough to care more about each other than about rules." The video had millions of views. Comments from people she'd never met, would never meet, saying she'd inspired them. She hated it and cherished it in equal measure. At 60, her heart started failing again. The doctors said it was the old damage finally catching up. Gave her 5 years, maybe less. She took the news calmly. She'd been living on borrowed time since the mission anyway. Every year after that gunship landed was a gift. Vance visited when he heard. Brought his whole family. The kids were teenagers now, applying to colleges, thinking about futures that existed because of a choice made before they were born. "We're naming the new Marine Air Station after you," Vance said. "Novick Field. Congress approved it last week." Kestrel shook her head. "I'm not dead yet." That's why we're doing it now, so you can see it. They flew her out for the dedication. She insisted on flying commercial, refused military transport, wanted to be anonymous for as long as possible. The air station was in California, sprawling, modern, state-of-the-art. Her name on the entrance in letters 10 feet tall. It felt wrong and right simultaneously. The ceremony was massive. Thousands of Marines, hundreds of pilots, politicians giving speeches about service and sacrifice. She sat through it feeling like an imposter. Then they unveiled the statue. Bronze, 20 feet tall. A pilot in flight gear looking skyward, one hand on her helmet. The face was hers, but idealized, stronger, more certain. "This isn't what I look like," she muttered to Vance. "It's what you looked like to us," he replied. "That day on the radio when you said you were inbound, you sounded like that, unbreakable." After the ceremony, they gave her a tour, showed her the training facilities, the simulators, the classrooms where her tactics were taught as standard doctrine. In one classroom, a young instructor was teaching a lesson on decision-making, using her mission as the example. Kestrel listened from the doorway. The instructor didn't know she was there. "Colonel Novik violated orders," the instructor said. But she understood something critical. Orders are guidelines for normal circumstances. When circumstances become abnormal, guidelines become suggestions. You have to think, have to evaluate, have to make the choice that saves lives even if it costs you everything. A student raised their hand. What did it cost her? The instructor pulled up a photo. Kestrel in the hospital, broken and pale. Her health, her career almost, her anonymity. She became famous for something she never wanted credit for. And she'd do it again because some people are built that way. Built to choose right over safe. Kestrel stepped into the classroom. The instructor's eyes went wide. Every student jumped to attention. "At ease," Kestrel said. "I was just listening. You're teaching it right." The instructor looked like they might faint. "Ma'am, I didn't know. Good. Keep teaching it like I'm not here. Like it's a story about choices, not about me. Because that's what matters, not who made the choice, just that someone did." She left before they could make it ceremonial. Vance found her outside, looking at the flight line. New aircraft, new generation, same mission. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm tired," she admitted. "Tired of being a story, want to just be a person again." "You are a person, the story is just what happened when that person made a choice." "The story is bigger than what happened, it's become a mythology. People think I'm fearless, perfect, always right. I'm none of those things." Vance smiled. "I know, I washed out of your program, remember. Saw you doubt yourself, saw you make mistakes. But I also saw you show up every day trying to be better. That's the part people need, not the perfection, the effort." They stood in silence, watching young pilots prep for training flights, learning the same lessons Kestrel had learned 40 years ago, the same lessons that had saved Vance's life. "Thank you," Vance said quietly, "for failing me, for saving me, for teaching me that both could be necessary. You don't need to thank me. I do, because you'll never ask for it. And someone needs to say it while you can still hear it." Kestrel's eyes burned. She'd heard thousands of thanks over the years, but this one hit differently. Because Vance knew the whole story. Knew the failure and the success, the doubt and the certainty. Knew her as a person, not a legend. That night at the hotel, she had another heart episode. Mild, manageable, but a warning. Time was running out. The last year was peaceful. Kestrel stayed in Montana, watched the seasons change, wrote letters to former students who still reached out. She didn't feel like she was dying, just transitioning to whatever came next. On a cold November morning, Reeves called. "Turn on the news. You need to see this." She turned it on. A cargo plane had crashed in Alaska. 12 crew members. Weather had been impossible, but they'd been evacuating civilians from a remote community before a blizzard hit. The pilot had stayed in the air an extra hour, flying in conditions that should have killed them, to make sure every civilian was safe before attempting the landing. The landing failed. Everyone on the plane died, but 200 civilians lived. The pilot's name was Captain Sarah Oakes, daughter of Jennifer Oakes, one of Kestrel's first students, granddaughter, in effect, of the ghost herself. The news was calling it heroic, calling it a tragedy, calling it a choice. Kestrel watched the coverage with tears streaming down her face. Saw Sarah's photo, young, determined, with her mother's eyes. Saw interviews with Jennifer, now a general, talking about her daughter's training, her commitment, her understanding that some things mattered more than survival. She learned it from her mother, Jennifer said to the cameras. And her mother learned it from the best. Colonel Novick taught us that being a pilot isn't about flying. It's about bringing people home, even if you can't bring yourself. The reporter asked if Sarah had violated orders. Yes, Jennifer said simply. And she saved 200 lives doing it, just like Ghost did, just like we're taught to do when the rules fail and people need us. Kestrel called Jennifer that night. I'm sorry about your daughter. Don't be. Jennifer's voice was steady, though grief ran underneath like bedrock. She knew what she was doing, knew the risks, made the choice anyway. I'm proud of her. She shouldn't have had to make that choice. But she did, and she made it right. That's what you taught us, not that we should break the rules, but that we should be ready to make the hard choice when the rules break down. They talked for an hour about Sarah, about the mission, about the weight of teaching people to value lives over regulations, knowing that sometimes that teaching would cost them everything. Do you regret it? Jennifer asked. Teaching us to think for ourselves. Kestrel thought about it, really thought. No. Because the alternative is teaching people to follow orders while they watch others die. That's not a military I want to be part of. Good, because Sarah died saving people. That's a legacy worth having. After the call, Kestrel sat in the dark, thinking about legacy, about the chain of choices stretching from her mission to Sarah's sacrifice, about how teaching someone to make the right choice meant accepting that the right choice might kill them. It was a terrible responsibility. She'd carried it for 40 years. On December 15th, Kestrel's heart finally gave out, not dramatically. She went asleep and didn't wake up, died in her cabin in Montana, alone and peaceful, with a book on her nightstand and letters from students scattered on her desk. The funeral was massive. They held it at Novick Field, the air station named for her. Thousands attended. Marines, pilots, students, families of people she'd saved. Vance gave the eulogy. He was a 3-star general now, gray-haired and weathered, but his voice was still steady. Ghost taught me something important. She taught me that washing out isn't failure if you learn from it. That calling for help isn't weakness if you trust who you're calling. That breaking the rules isn't heroism if you're just being reckless, but it might be necessary if people are dying and the rules can't save them. He paused, looking at the crowd, at the faces of people whose lives had been touched by one stubborn pilot who refused to let them die. She didn't want to be famous, didn't want statues or ceremonies. She wanted to fly, to teach, to make a difference quietly and then disappear. But we couldn't let her, because what she did mattered too much. Mattered to the 281 of us who lived because she broke the rules. Mattered to our children, who exist because she chose risk over safety. Mattered to every pilot she taught, who learned that thinking matters more than obedience. The crowd was silent. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. We called her Ghost because she operated in shadows. We called her Shepherd because she brought us home. But I think the best name for her is Teacher, because she taught us the most important lesson, that rules exist to save lives, but sometimes saving lives means knowing which rules to break. They flew a missing man formation. 4 F-16s, one breaking away and climbing into the sky. The symbolism was obvious but still powerful. One pilot gone, the formation incomplete, the gap visible for everyone to see. Kestrel would have hated it, would have said it was too much, too dramatic, too focused on her instead of the mission. But she would have understood why they did it anyway. After the funeral, the Marines gathered at the statue. Someone had left flowers at its base, then more flowers. Then letters, photographs, mementos. Within a week it was covered. A shrine to a pilot who never wanted to be worshipped but had been too good at saving people to avoid it. Vance visited the shrine often, stood before the bronze version of the woman who'd saved his life and changed everything. His children came with him sometimes, brought their own children, passed down the story. Great-grandpa, why is she important? His grandson asked once. Vance knelt down. Because she taught us that caring about people is more important than following rules. That sometimes the right thing to do is scary and dangerous and might cost you everything, but you do it anyway. The boy looked up at the statue. Was she scared, terrified, but she flew anyway? Why? Because people needed her, and when people need you, being scared doesn't matter as much as showing up. The boy nodded solemnly, the lesson planting itself in young soil. Kestrel's legacy wasn't the medals or the ceremonies or the air station bearing her name. It was moments like this. Children learning that heroism meant caring enough to act, even when you were afraid. The letters kept coming. Even after her death, people wrote to her, left them at the statue, mailed them to Novick Field. Letters from people she'd never met, thanking her for teaching them that rules were important but people were more important. The Air Force collected them, created an archive. Thousands of letters, each one a testament to the ripples one choice could create. Historians studied her mission, wrote papers on decision-making under pressure, on the ethics of disobedience, on the balance between regulation and judgment. Some condemned her, said she'd set a dangerous precedent, that her success didn't justify the risk. Others praised her, said she'd reminded the military why rules existed, to save lives, not to replace thinking. Both sides were right. That was the complexity Kestrel had lived with. The knowledge that her choice was simultaneously right and wrong, necessary and reckless, heroic and foolish. Decades passed. The people she'd saved grew old. Vance retired, then died, surrounded by the family that existed because of her. His children told the story to their children. The legend evolved, grew, became something both more and less than the truth. But at its core, the story remained the same. A pilot heard people dying and chose to help, even when help meant risking everything. That choice echoed through time, influenced policies, shaped training, changed how the military thought about orders and obedience and the space between them. 50 years after the mission, the Air Force declassified all the records. The radio communications, the flight data, the investigation files. People could hear Kestrel's voice now, calm and focused, talking Vance through the chaos. Could see the impossible maneuvers, the split-second decisions, the 1,000 tiny choices that added up to survival. Students studied it. Pilots memorized it. It became the standard for what aviation could be when everything went wrong and someone refused to give up. 100 years after the mission, Novick Field was still training pilots, still teaching them to think, to question, to make the hard choices. The statue had been replaced twice, worn down by weather and the hands of people touching it for luck. But the story remained. On the wall of the main training facility, they'd inscribed her final message to her students, the one she'd written the week before she died. "I was never brave. I was just too stubborn to listen to people die. If that's heroism, then be stubborn. Be the person who shows up when everyone else has given up. Be the person who breaks the rules when the rules break down. Be the person who cares more about doing what's right than doing what's safe. And when it costs you everything, know that somewhere someone is alive because of that cost. That's not nothing, that's everything." The words were simple, honest, imperfect, just like she'd been. But they captured the essential truth, that one person making one choice could change everything. That caring about people was the most important mission. That sometimes the rules needed to be broken by someone brave enough to face the consequences. Kestrel Novick had been that person. And in teaching others to be that person too, she'd created a legacy that would outlive any statue, any ceremony, any medal. She'd taught people to choose right over safe. And that choice, repeated across generations, saved thousands of lives. Lives that became families. Families that became futures. Futures that existed because one stubborn pilot had refused to let them die. In the end, that was enough. More than enough, it was everything. The sky remembered her. The people she saved remembered her. The students she taught remembered her. And in remembering, they carried forward the lesson that heroism wasn't about being fearless. It was about being afraid and choosing to act anyway. It was about caring more about others than about yourself. It was about knowing when to break the rules because following them meant abandoning the people who needed you most. Ghost had lived it. Shepard had taught it. And Colonel Kestrel Novick had proven that one person in one moment making one impossible choice could change the world. Not through grand gestures or perfect plans, but through the simple act of refusing to give up when giving up was the easiest option. She'd collapsed after saving his life, woken to 800 Marines standing in her shadow. And in that shadow, a light had been born. A light that would guide pilots through darkness, through doubt, through the impossible choices that define what it means to serve. The light still burns, will always burn, because some choices are too important to be forgotten. Some people are too necessary to be anything less than legendary. And some stories deserve to be told again and again until every person who hears them understands the fundamental truth that caring about people is worth any cost, that showing up matters more than being fearless, that the rules exist to serve us, not the other way around. That was her legacy. That was her gift. That was Ghost, Shepherd, Teacher, the pilot who broke the rules and changed everything. And somewhere in the vast blue sky she loved so much, she's still flying, still teaching, still showing us what it means to choose right over safe, love over fear, people over protocol, still bringing everyone home.